The morning sun cast long shadows across the gravel parking lot of Murphy's Diner, a humble establishment that had served the small town of Millbrook for over 40 years. The scent of bacon and fresh coffee drifted through the screen door as early Sunday patrons enjoyed their breakfast in peaceful quiet. Harold Morrison, 75 years old with silver hair and weathered hands, carefully maneuvered his aging pickup truck into a parking space near the entrance. His movements were deliberate and slow, each step calculated to accommodate the old injuries that had never quite healed right. As Harold reached for the door handle of his truck, the tranquil morning was shattered by the thunderous roar of a motorcycle engine. A massive Harley-Davidson came tearing into the parking lot, its chrome gleaming and pipes echoing off the surrounding buildings. The rider, a heavy-set man in his 40s wearing leather chaps and a bandana, revved the engine repeatedly as he pulled up directly behind Harold's truck, blocking any possibility of exit. The biker killed his engine and dismounted with aggressive swagger. His leather vest displayed various patches and insignia, and his arms were covered in elaborate tattoos. He strode toward Harold with the confidence of someone accustomed to intimidating others through sheer presence and volume. "Move it, old man," the biker barked, his voice carrying across the parking lot. "You're taking up space that real riders need. This ain't a parking lot for broke-down farm trucks." Harold turned slowly, his expression remaining calm despite the confrontation. He had learned long ago that escalation rarely solved anything, and his weathered face showed the patience that came with decades of experience. "Excuse me, sir. I'm just trying to get some breakfast. There's plenty of room for both of us here." The biker stepped closer, invading Harold's personal space with deliberate intimidation. "Don't give me that polite garbage, Gramps. I've been riding these roads for 20 years, and I don't need some decrepit old fool telling me about parking spaces. You need to learn some respect for your betters." Several patrons inside the diner had noticed the commotion and were now watching through the windows. The tension in the air was palpable as Harold maintained his composure, his hands remaining steady despite the verbal assault. "Sir, I don't want any trouble. I'm just trying to have a quiet breakfast. Perhaps we can both enjoy our morning without conflict." The biker's face reddened with anger at Harold's refusal to be intimidated. "Conflict? You think this is conflict, old-timer? You haven't seen conflict. I could snap you in half without breaking a sweat. Maybe it's time someone taught you about the real world. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Your comment helps our community grow stronger. Thanks, and let's get back to the story." What the biker didn't know was that Harold Morrison carried within him a history that would have commanded instant respect from anyone who understood the true meaning of service and sacrifice. Beneath his humble flannel shirt and worn jeans lay the heart of a United States Marine who had earned his stripes in the jungles of Vietnam, where he had saved the lives of 17 men during a firefight that lasted 3 days and 2 nights. The Purple Heart citation in his bedroom drawer told only part of the story of his courage under fire. Harold's son Michael had followed in his father's footsteps, though he had risen to heights that his modest father rarely mentioned. Colonel Michael Morrison currently served as commanding officer of the 2nd Marine Expeditionary Unit, stationed just 2 hours away at Camp Lejeune. The relationships Harold had built during his military service extended far beyond his immediate family, reaching into a brotherhood that spanned generations of warriors who understood the sacred bond between those who had served. As the biker continued his verbal assault, Harold's phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed his son's name, but Harold didn't want to answer while being confronted. However, a patron inside the diner had already taken it upon himself to contact authorities, not just local police, but through a veterans network that existed to protect their own. The call had reached Sergeant Major Rodriguez, a career Marine who maintained connections throughout the veteran community. Within minutes, a series of phone calls began cascading through military and law enforcement channels. Colonel Morrison received the alert while reviewing training exercises, and his response was immediate and decisive. No one threatened his father without consequences. Back in the parking lot, the biker had escalated his harassment to physical intimidation, stepping so close to Harold that their faces were inches apart. "Listen here, old man. I'm losing patience with your attitude. Maybe a little lesson in respect is exactly what you need. I've dealt with tougher guys than you, and they all learned to show proper deference." Harold's military training remained embedded in his muscle memory, and he could have responded with devastating effectiveness despite his age. However, he chose instead to maintain his dignity and composure, knowing that true strength often meant restraint rather than retaliation. "Sir, I've served my country and community for many years. I'm not looking for trouble, and I would appreciate the same courtesy in return." The biker laughed mockingly, his voice carrying across the parking lot for all to hear. "Served your country? What? Did you work at the post office? Or maybe you were one of those weekend warriors playing soldier?" Real men earn their respect through action, not through stories about glory days that probably never happened. What the biker failed to notice was the gradual arrival of vehicles that didn't quite fit the typical Sunday morning diner crowd. A black sedan had pulled into the far end of the parking lot, its occupants observing the situation with professional interest. Another unmarked vehicle had positioned itself at the parking lot's entrance. The veteran community's response network was mobilizing with quiet efficiency. Inside the diner, conversations had stopped as patrons watched the confrontation unfold. Several of the older customers recognized Harold as a regular who always treated the staff with kindness and tipped generously despite his modest means. They had heard whispers over the years about his military service, though Harold himself never spoke of his experiences unless directly asked. The biker, emboldened by Harold's continued restraint, decided to escalate further. "You know what your problem is, old-timer? You think the world owes you something just because you're old. Well, let me tell you something about the real world. Respect isn't given, it's taken. And right now, I'm taking yours." Harold's jaw tightened slightly, the only outward sign of his growing frustration with the situation. He had faced enemy fire in combat zones, had carried wounded comrades through hostile territory, and had earned decorations for valor that few men would ever receive. Yet he chose silence over violence, dignity over degradation. Miles away, Colonel Morrison's convoy was moving with military precision toward Millbrook. The three black SUVs carried a team of Marines who had received a simple brief. One of their brotherhood was being threatened, and that was unacceptable. The lead vehicle maintained constant communication with local law enforcement, ensuring coordination and preventing any jurisdictional confusion. The biker, interpreting Harold's silence as weakness, made his fatal mistake. He reached out and shoved Harold backward, causing the elderly veteran to stumble slightly before regaining his balance. That push would prove to be the catalyst for a response that the biker never could have anticipated. "You're pathetic," the biker sneered. "Can't even stand up to a little push. Maybe if you had ever faced real danger instead of sitting behind some desk in the military, you'd know how to handle yourself like a man." The irony of those words would become apparent very soon, as Harold Morrison had faced more real danger in a single week of combat than the biker would encounter in a lifetime. The Bronze Star with V device for valor, the Purple Heart, and the Combat Action Ribbon represented experiences that had forged Harold's character in ways that casual observers could never understand. As the confrontation continued, the black SUVs had reached the outskirts of Millbrook. Colonel Morrison sat in the lead vehicle, his dress blue uniform immaculate, and his expression grim. Behind him rode Marines whose respect for veteran brotherhood ran deeper than blood relations. They had served in Iraq and Afghanistan, had lost friends to enemy fire, and understood that an attack on one veteran was an attack on all. The biker continued his harassment, unaware that his actions were being observed by an ever-growing audience. Local police had been contacted and were en route, but they had been advised to maintain distance until the military personnel arrived. This was about more than simple harassment. It was about respect for service and the bonds that connected warriors across generations. Harold finally spoke again, his voice steady despite the provocation. "Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time to allow me to go about my business peacefully. I don't want this situation to escalate further than it already has." The biker's response was immediate and mocking. "Escalate? What are you going to do? Call your grandson to come fight your battles? Face it, old man, you're all alone here, and nobody's coming to save you. It's time you learned what real authority looks like." Those words would prove to be prophetic, though not in the way the biker intended. Real authority was indeed approaching, in the form of United States Marines who had sworn an oath to protect and defend, and who considered that oath to extend to their brothers in arms regardless of when they had served. The first indication that something significant was happening came when the black SUVs turned into the diner's parking lot in perfect formation. Their arrival was silent but unmistakable, and several patrons inside the diner moved closer to the windows to observe the unfolding scene. The vehicles positioned themselves strategically, blocking potential exit routes while maintaining clear sight lines to the confrontation. The biker noticed the new arrivals but misinterpreted their significance. "Looks like we've got some government bureaucrats joining the party," he called out loudly. "Probably more old-timers who think their desk jobs make them important. This just keeps getting better." Harold recognized the tactical positioning of the vehicles and understood immediately what was happening. His expression remained calm, but for the first time since the confrontation began, a slight smile played at the corners of his mouth. The cavalry had indeed arrived, though the biker had no comprehension of what that meant. The doors of the lead SUV opened simultaneously, and Colonel Morrison stepped out in full dress uniform, his ribbons and decorations clearly visible in the morning sunlight. Behind him emerged 3 other Marines, each carrying themselves with the unmistakable bearing of professional warriors. Their movements were coordinated and purposeful as they approached the confrontation. The biker's confidence wavered slightly as he took in the sight of the uniformed military personnel, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself. Well, looks like the circus has come to town. Let me guess, you boys are here to protect Granddad from the big bad biker? This ought to be entertaining." Colonel Morrison's voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of decades of command and the steel of absolute conviction. "Sir, you are currently harassing a United States Marine veteran who has served his country with distinction and honor. I strongly suggest you step away and reconsider your actions." The biker laughed, though the sound was less confident than before. "A Marine veteran? This old fool? Look at him. He can barely stand up straight. Whatever stories he's been telling you about his military service, I guarantee they're exaggerated. Real Marines don't get pushed around by bikers." Colonel Morrison's expression hardened as he stepped closer to his father, his bearing radiating the kind of authority that could not be questioned or ignored. "Sir, the man you have been harassing is Staff Sergeant Harold Morrison, United States Marine Corps, veteran of 2 tours in Vietnam, recipient of the Purple Heart, Bronze Star with V device, and Combat Action Ribbon. He saved 17 lives during the Battle of Khe Sanh and carried wounded Marines to safety under enemy fire for 3 consecutive days." The biker's face began to show the first signs of uncertainty as the gravity of the situation started to penetrate his consciousness. The surrounding crowd had grown larger, and the atmosphere had shifted dramatically from casual Sunday morning calm to something much more serious and significant. Furthermore, Colonel Morrison continued, his voice carrying clearly across the parking lot, "Staff Sergeant Morrison is my father, and the man whose example inspired me to serve 27 years in the United States Marine Corps. Every Marine here today owes a debt to veterans like him, and we do not tolerate disrespect toward those who have earned their place in our brotherhood through blood, sacrifice, and unwavering service to their country." The transformation in the biker's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. The swagger disappeared, replaced by growing awareness that he had made a catastrophic error in judgment. The other Marines had positioned themselves in a semicircle, not threatening but unmistakably present, their silent witness to the confrontation adding weight to their colonel's words. "Sir," one of the younger Marines spoke for the first time, his voice respectful but firm, "my grandfather served alongside Marines like Staff Sergeant Morrison in Vietnam. The stories I heard growing up about the courage and sacrifice of that generation shaped my decision to serve. What you've done here today dishonors not just him, but every person who has worn the uniform." The biker looked around at the faces surrounding him, finally beginning to comprehend the magnitude of his mistake. The casual Sunday morning had transformed into something far more significant, and he found himself at the center of a situation that was rapidly spiraling beyond his control or understanding. Colonel Morrison stepped directly in front of the biker, his uniform crisp and his bearing commanding absolute attention. "Sir, you stated that respect must be earned through action. Staff Sergeant Morrison earned his respect in the jungles of Vietnam, where he faced enemy fire to save the lives of his fellow Marines. He earned it through decades of quiet service to his community, treating others with dignity and kindness even when he received neither in return. What have you done to earn the respect you demand?" The question hung in the air like a challenge that could not be ignored. The biker, for the first time since his arrival, found himself speechless. His entire worldview had been built on the assumption that intimidation and aggression commanded respect, but he was now faced with the reality of earned honor and genuine authority. The colonel continued, his words measured and deliberate. You have spent this morning attempting to humiliate and intimidate a man who has given more to his country than you could comprehend. You mocked his service, questioned his courage, and physically assaulted a 75-year-old veteran. These actions do not demonstrate strength. They reveal the depth of your character, or rather, the absence of it. Harold stepped forward slightly, placing a gentle hand on his son's arm. Michael, that's enough. He's learned his lesson, and I don't believe he meant any real harm. Sometimes people act without understanding the full situation. The colonel looked at his father with obvious pride and affection, then turned back to the biker. Sir, my father's generosity of spirit is precisely what makes him worthy of respect. Even now, after being harassed and assaulted, he seeks to excuse your behavior rather than demanding the consequences you have earned. That is the difference between a man of honor and someone who merely demands respect without earning it. The biker, thoroughly humbled and clearly shaken by the turn of events, struggled to find words adequate to the situation. I didn't know. I didn't realize. Look, I'm sorry, okay? I was just having a bad morning, and I took it out on him. I didn't mean anything personal by it. Colonel Morrison's expression remained stern, but showed a glimmer of the possibility for redemption. Sir, ignorance is not an excuse for disrespect, particularly when directed toward those who have served their country. However, recognition of your error and genuine remorse can be the beginning of understanding. Staff Sergeant Morrison risked his life so that future generations of Americans could live in freedom, including the freedom for you to ride your motorcycle and speak your mind. That freedom comes with the responsibility to treat others, especially veterans, with the respect they have earned. The gathering crowd watched in silence as the biker approached Harold, his earlier arrogance completely replaced by obvious shame and contrition. Sir, I owe you an apology. I was completely out of line, and I'm sorry for disrespecting you and your service. I had no right to treat you the way I did. Harold extended his hand to the biker, his expression kind despite everything that had occurred. Apology accepted, son. We all make mistakes. What matters is learning from them and doing better going forward. The handshake between the elderly veteran and the chastened biker symbolized more than just the resolution of a single conflict. It represented the power of earned respect, the strength of brotherhood among those who serve, and the possibility for redemption when genuine remorse meets gracious forgiveness. Colonel Morrison addressed the assembled crowd, his voice carrying the authority of command but also the warmth of genuine appreciation. Ladies and gentlemen, what you have witnessed today is an example of the character that built this nation. Staff Sergeant Morrison and veterans like him served without expectation of glory or recognition, motivated by duty and love of country. They deserve our respect not because they demand it, but because they have earned it through sacrifice and service. As the Marines prepared to depart, the biker approached Colonel Morrison one final time. Sir, if it's appropriate, I'd like to buy your father breakfast and learn more about his service. I think I have a lot to learn about what real respect means. The colonel smiled for the first time since his arrival. Sir, I believe that would mean a great deal to him. Staff Sergeant Morrison has always believed that understanding and education are more powerful than punishment in changing hearts and minds. The morning sun climbed higher as the confrontation transformed into an opportunity for learning and growth. Harold Morrison, the humble veteran who had asked for nothing more than a quiet breakfast, had once again demonstrated the values that made him worthy of the uniform he had worn decades earlier. The Brotherhood of Marines had responded to protect one of their own, but it was Harold's own character that had turned conflict into connection, anger into understanding, and disrespect into a lesson in genuine honor.